Okay, cool.
Yeah.
No, here we are. Here we are. Hey, everybody. This is Allie, the conversation starter. We are about to have a conversation. We will be talking with millennials today. And so the topic of this conversation is going to be focusing on millennials, race, and why. And so if everyone would like to go ahead and introduce themselves before we get started.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Devin Simmons, and I'm 24 and go to College of Law in West Virginia. So yeah, it's pretty much me.
I'm Ariana Thompson. I'm 24 as well. I also go to the College of Law with Devin.
I'm Jordan Uniton. I'm 28, and I'm getting my master's in teaching special education.
Woo! Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't give the teacher some love. Not to say that about you all within the law, because
we can be biased. It's fine.
It's okay. I'm getting a master's, so I understand that too. I'm working on my master's in public admin, so I got you.
Okay, yeah, I ain't gonna lie, I got a special love for the special education teachers here. So I try to do that. Woo! All right. So before we get started, ladies and gents, the conversation which we are going to engage in. I'm gonna throw out the question of why is it important to have the conversation on race? So why do you all as millennials think it's important to have the conversation on race?
Who wants to start?
You can go ahead.
Okay. I think it's important just because it's kind of anything in the world. Like if you have a problem and it's a persistent problem, you have to deal with it. I mean, especially when it's not just a problem like in your country, it's a problem like globally. So, colorism and things like that, even in the Black community, and, and racism in general, where we tend to even subconsciously just appeal, things that are lighter appeal to us more than things that are darker, and that's why, light versus dark, evil versus good, but usually evil's, it's attached to things that are of the darker nature. While light is always attached to things of the brighter nature and stuff like that. It's kind of just like a thing that's been reinforced, even though that's not true amongst all cultures and stuff like that. But I just think it's important, again, just because in order to come up with a solution, you have to address the problem. And if you don't know what the problem is and you don't bring people to the table, I mean, from who suffers because of the problem and who's causing the problem, then you can't get the best solution as well. Because that's also the point where you want not just any solution, but for hopefully the most peaceful solution that brings the most benefit to everybody. And so everybody can reap the rewards from something good, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I think your soundproofing would be seen as evil right now. But I agree. I mean, I agree. I think to me, it's very similar to living with roommates. Like the past couple of years, living with certain roommates who, might not live the same way you live, or might not fill up the pure water filter as much as you'd want them to fill up the water filter. And I think it's important to communicate. If you can't communicate with them, the problem's not going to be solved. Someone's going to feel as though someone's going to feel offended. Someone might not know they're offending. It's just important to communicate when you're trying to solve a problem and when you're trying to live with people. And I think nowadays everyone wants to remove accountability from being each other's roommates. I mean, we're all roommates.
I find it interesting that we face this question of like, why is it important to conversate about race? But it's important for the simple fact that it affects so many, and some people are very unaware of how it affects them. And then, like you said, it's communication, and a part of how I communicate is in my culture, how I've, been raised, which has a lot to do with my race in a lot of areas. And communication between parties will either exasperate things or help solve things. And so the conversation around race is ever expanding, I feel. And in this day and age, it's so important to talk about because it touches like literally every conversation you can tie it back in some way. And this culture we live in, everyone is offended about something, as you said. And so it's intriguing to have to bring it up just to kind of bring it back down again. To like, I have to assert that race is a problem just to also let you know that it's not in this problem, or it is in this problem, because that's where we've come in this culture. And I think that's, yeah.
It's interesting you said that too, because it kind of ties to like the two things. Like I know me and Jordan have recently been talking about this, where and I was a part of this too, but I've changed like drastically in the way I think about it. But a lot of people, like, they don't see like, there's two things. A lot of people don't see Jewish people as an ethnicity, or, you know, a people. The more they see it as a religion. But you don't know the history and the things, you know, or people, you know, like 21 Savage recently got into a lot of problems or trouble because he had a anti-Semitic lyric that you wouldn't think is anti-Semitic if you had no context behind it. So, you know, it's like something, I got that Jewish money, no, you know, and, you know, people will be like, oh, that, you know, that's true. A lot of Jewish people do have money and stuff like that. Not realizing that, you know, like in World War II and even prior to that, but before Nazi Germany became Nazi Germany, one of the big stigmas, you know, is you need an enemy. And if you're in a country where you have a lot of non-Jewish Germans who are poor, and then you have a lot of Jewish Germans who are also in the same boat as you, but, you know, you need an enemy. So somebody's pushing this narrative, you know, like, look at all the Jewish people. They own all the banks. They own all the money. They own all the media. You know, they want to take control. Yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't realize that if you didn't know that history. And so you put in your lyrics thinking, you know, like, you know, I just want a lot of money like the Jewish community, not realizing that there's a lot of anti-Semitic notions and a mentality that comes from that. And the narrative that put that out in the world, you know, like, it comes from like white supremacy and other things and like Nazism and stuff. And so it seems like, you know, like, oh, like a compliment or a good thing. But in reality, it's like, no, because you can't detach it from where it came from. And that the fact that those people who still put that narrative in the world are still here today and exist, and they truly do believe like it's a conspiracy to dominate and things like that. And even when you look at Europe, you know, like, the Jewish people, like, when I lived in Rome, I remember I had heard about it, but I never seen it. And so when I was walking around, I passed. It was an elementary school. Like, these are just little kids. Like, I saw someone, like, it's just nothing but little kids. Like, I don't think there's anybody over 5. And they had military outside the school, and it was weird because it was like a legit, like, I don't know what you call it, but like the giant just vehicle truck that can hold like multiple people in it, and then 2 military guys with like real like bulletproof vests, assault rifles. Like, it was like the real deal. Like, they were really prepared in case anything went down. And it also brings up something else where I think you were partly there, but I'm not throwing any names or anything out there. But when the Romani people, a lot of people, you know, they like to throw the term gypsy around, and they don't know gypsy's a slur, you know? And so, and I feel like in the US, gypsy is pushed as a free spirit, you know, almost like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know, this woman of color who wears all these bright things, and she dances and she does all these things, and she's a free spirit and she does all that. But it doesn't really, you know, you have that the older white man who like hates her people and stuff like that. But, you know, as a kid, I don't think that registers with you. Right. So, you know, you see the Hunchback and you see her and you're seeing all that. And a lot of people in the US, you know, they want to dress like gypsies, you know, and even though the right term is travelers, but if you're not going to call them the Romani, but they, you know, they want to dress like that. And I remember talking to somebody at this thing that we were at, and I was trying to tell her that, you know, like, she was trying to say it's her culture. And I was like, no, like, I know what she's trying to say, you know, like a free spirit and all that stuff. I'm like, no, like, if you're not Romani, you don't have the right to take their suffering, like, because the Romani people are like, they're definitely oppressed. And even when you go to Europe, people talk down to them. People do not like it. They talk to them like they're subhuman. And so, like, for somebody to take that and then, you know, make it as like, I'm just a free spirit and I'm just this and that. I'm like, no, like that's not your culture. That's not your people. You don't even know like what Romani women specifically, especially go through. And so like for you to deny that and say like, no, it depends on where you're from and things like that. Like, no, like if you're not part of the Romani, then no, you just can't take somebody's culture and their name. And especially you take the slur and you use it as your own too, not realizing that you're using a slur.
There's a restaurant called Gypsy Den down the road. I just don't think they'd get the same business if they named it Jew Den or something.
Yeah.
You know, completely.
Yeah.
You know, a similar, you know, equivalent to Gypsy in a different, different race, different culture.
I definitely want to speak on that, but did you, Ali, want to?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because we have two new arrivals, and so I wanted to allow them to be able to introduce themselves to the conversation, which we're having on race coming from the millennial perspective. And ladies, we are basically having the conversation on why it's important to have the conversation on race at this point in time for you all as millennials. So if ladies, you could introduce yourself real quick, however you choose to do it.
Okay. Want me to go first?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hi, my name is Amina Ghaffar. My mom is Lumbee. Can you guys hear me?
We can't hear you.
Can't hear me now?
A little bit better.
I think a bit, yeah.
Okay.
Go louder, go louder.
Okay, now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I'm on vacation at Disney World with my family, so I apologize. But my mother is from the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. So it's a Native American tribe. It's the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River. And my father is African American, and he's also Cherokee. My father's family is also Muslim, and my mother's family is Christian. But I don't really identify as any particular religion. I have an appreciation for all religions. And I also have an appreciation for the Native American side of me with the spirituality. And what else about me? I graduated from East Carolina University. Go Pirates. I just finished a master's at Georgetown recently, and I got a master's degree in complementary alternative medicine. And a reason why I think that it's important to talk about race at this point in time is I'm sure all of you guys feel the same way about how obvious it is. Just the current administration that we have and what they're doing to human beings at the border and what they've been doing to human beings since the beginning of this country. So that's my little introduction. But nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you too. And
okay, my name is Key Nelms, and I am a graduating law student at WVU Law. I am Afro-Latina, and I believe it's important to have the conversation about race because it's a conversation that we sweep under the rug so frequently, but it affects all of us in our outward lives and the lives that we live, you know, inside our homes where we, you know, think it's a little more safe to have these conversations. And, you know, administrations like we currently have bring that to light.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna jump real quick because I heard you all talking about the Romani people and about how, and I've seen it too, especially since there's been kind of like this spiritual shift about how you're seeing a lot of shops that have, you know, the name, I don't like to say the name, it starts with a G, y'all said it earlier, you know, and how people are naming, you know, their stores based off of different ethnic groups who really, I think the reason why they're able to do the things that they do is because at this point in time, different cultural or ethnic groups in our nation especially have not really been able to have a voice to be able to stop a lot of the things that are occurring with specific terms that are used against them, really in regards to, you know, as a racial slur and as something derogatory. And so let's talk a little bit about racial slurs or cultural appropriation in regards to specific groups. Because, you know, we're having issues right now, whereas we have our indigenous groups who are fighting the Washington's team the name of, Washington's football team. We've got, like you said, Devin, about the store. No, was it you, Devin, or was it Jordan about the store? Jordan. Yeah, Jordan, about the store that's named, of course, that uses the racial slur of that the Romani people tend to be known as. So let's talk about that. What is your perspective on that?
If you don't mind, I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
I think it's, so when I was thinking about that, as Devin was talking, as you were talking, is it comes back down to something that I know you and Jordan appreciate a lot: education. Because in this country, we're not taught, at least I wasn't in my school system taught, that the G word is a slur, and no one would know that unless they took it upon themselves to get to know either a person of that culture or to research the culture themselves. And in this society, we have grown up with a culture that, one, teaches us to be skeptical in a certain light, but the moment we start questioning, they shut it back down to, this is what we put before you, take it. And so I think that is a big part as to why a lot of things go, one, either as ignorance for a lot of people, because like Devin said, 21 Savage probably has no idea why it would have affected any Jewish person for him to say that. But now he's getting an education on it. And it's usually through the internet where people are not as nice about it, versus we could have been taught a long time ago. But because oppression from the beginning of our nation has been swept under the rug, or just easily said that we don't care, we are now faced with people who are trying to not be politically correct, but just be respectful, be able to communicate with people without offending each other. And we're having pushback because for generations people have gotten away with whatever they wanted, and no one has taught them it was wrong. And now when our generation, or anyone who's modern enlightened like yourself or anybody else, tries to say, like, you shouldn't do that because of X, Y, and Z, it is now an issue. And it's an issue because it challenges their thinking, and it challenges everything that they have known, but that's because it doesn't affect them, personally.
I think it's a matter of having self-awareness too. I think a lot of people lack the self-awareness to, I understand. I think when it comes to cultural appropriation, I think intent is a big factor too, because there's plenty of people out there who really appreciate another culture's, just another culture in whatever form that manifests itself, whether it's clothing or music or something else, and they appreciate it, but sometimes they lack the awareness or lack the listening to that culture and how they unpack it to the world, how they wear it in their world, and explaining where it comes from, and just giving it the respect it deserves, just to communicate this. I'm wearing this, or I'm not wearing this because I've heard plenty of times that this culture says they don't want me to wear this, so maybe I shouldn't wear this. I'd be listening, or being self-aware enough to say, hey, I'm wearing this. I fully respect this culture. This culture is amazing for this, and this reason. And if you're curious as to what this is I'm wearing, see this culture. Not just, this is something I just threw on from the Goodwill and look at me, I'm awesome. There's a difference there.
I actually want to add on to that because I'm a big proponent of, supporting Indigenous artists. So personally, I don't identify as every Native American tribe because we're all. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Louder.
Okay, sorry. I'm really soft-spoken if you guys couldn't catch on. But, even when I go to different Native American tribes, like when I went to Alaska a few months ago, I made an effort to buy local art because I like to support Indigenous artists, but I would never pass that off as, oh, this is my culture because I'm not Alaskan Native. I think that when you buy from Indigenous artists and you get the story behind the craftsmanship and how the care and that they put into making that craft, I think that's actually an act of decolonization to a certain extent, because you're not buying from these areas that you know, mass-produced dream catchers and pass them off as like just Native American. Oh, this is Native American. Actually, it's Ojibwe. So, you know, knowing where things come from and understanding the story behind it, as you were saying before, is also very important. And like I said, I think that's a way of appreciating anti-colonizing at the same time.
So as we've expanded and grown, and you know, technology has helped group us together, an important piece that we seem to overlook is other people's cultures and histories are taught as electives rather than, you know, a piece of our history. You know, American writers seem to pride America being this melting pot or a salad bowl, but you know, it's mostly taken on someone's own self to go out and educate themselves on other people's, you know, religions or beliefs or, you know, customs and ideals. So along with, you know, the spreading of technology, we also have a very commercial way of living. So people, you know, want to be worldly and want to expand into other cultures, but they don't know how to interact with those cultures. But they just know, I have money, I like this, I want to buy into it, or this seems cool, I see it on TV, I want to, you know, be into the latest fashions or the latest trends. But a lot of that is because of our education systems.
I agree with you there. It's interesting too, because I feel like that's the same thing, like when people wear headdresses and stuff like that, and the feathers and things. Yeah, and you know, it's one of those things where a lot of people, they'll, you know, it's, you know, they only see it as clothing, not realizing that no, like it's ceremonial, they're spiritual. There's a history behind this whole thing. Like you don't just get to put that on, you know, like, and one of the big things too, I think. It's kind of like with the, you know, the Washington team, like they're challenging, you know, the Redskins and stuff like that. But people don't realize. Yeah, I know you don't like the. I'm like a big proponent of, like, if we're gonna have the conversation on it, sometimes you just have to throw the whatever is being challenged needs to be addressed. But one of the biggest things is, it's funny because I don't even think that is the worst, because I think the worst thing I've noticed about this country, which I never really thought of, is when you go to Florida or in the military, they name vehicles and stuff after nations and tribes that they've purged. So like Black Hawk, Apache, you know, and I don't think people realize that too. Like you literally spent like over hundreds of years purging people, and then you named streets and you named your vehicles and military and stuff after them. And you don't see how that's like a slap in the face to the entire community. Like, and I think that's just an important thing to address, because a lot of people, you know, like, why don't you just, it's kind of how you said, you know, take it or leave it, Ariana. Like, and like, even with the gypsy thing, I tell you that it's, well, you're wrong. Like, it's not like depending on where you are, it's your culture. No, I tell you, no, like, it's the Romani people. This is where it's from. And it's a slur. Like, it doesn't matter where if you're not Romani, you shouldn't be using it. I mean, you kind of hit me back with, you know, it's, you know, no, like it's depending on your culture. And it's like, what do you mean it's depending on your culture? Like, are you Romani? And so, and it's kind of like, it's just one of those things where there's ignorance and then there's willful ignorance, and that's the biggest thing, you know, where Martin Luther King, the only thing worse than an oppressor is the person who's indifferent. The person who stands there, can make the change, and has the luxury or the luxury to not do anything, but definitely should, and they just sit there and not do anything, because now you know that there's a problem, you know how the solution, and you know what's the right thing to do, and you choose not to do it, or you choose to ignore what people are telling you and act like everything's okay, despite the entire community coming to you and saying, like, no, like, this is a problem and this is how it hurts us. But then at the same token, you want people to respect your pain and where you're from and how that affects you and how it affects your mentality, you know? And so, like, a lot of people voted for Trump, you know, and they don't understand how people can, you know, they feel, you know, especially amongst the conservatives, I feel like now it's, you know, like, now, like if you're a conservative woman or if you're a conservative, you're one of the most persecuted people ever. And it's like, you're literally being persecuted because you refuse to acknowledge anybody else's pain, but you want everybody to, like if I live in a poor area or I live in this and that, but you don't want to listen to other marginalized communities. You want to shove all that off and then make everybody listen to your woes. So I think it's just one of those things. Yeah.
No, and I was gonna say and I think what you were saying is the ability, the ability to be indifferent, like you have the luxury of it. That's our very definition of privilege, and a lot of what we come up against is I have to combat your privilege. I'm not it's not always your heart; it's just your privilege that has put this blinder on you, and now you realize you don't see what's happening. And so unless you have a deep relationship, I mean, for a lot of people, unless they have a deep relationship with someone, they have yet to understand what's on the other side of their privilege. Because for them, everything is shaded in who they are and what they've experienced. So, I don't think this is so bad because, I've never experienced that, but I'm not you. And I won't have the same experience as you, even if he and I are both Black, but he is also Puerto Rican. So I can't be yeah, I know everything it's what it's like to be like Keith, because we're both Black women. I can't say that. And so I can't even say from one Black person to the next person, it's the same experience, but I can say as Black people, there is an overall experience. And that privilege has blinded you to it because you don't have to experience it. And experience is a lot of our learning, especially when we're younger. And so a lot of people don't go beyond that. And when you don't go beyond your experiences and what you've been taught in a classroom, you fail to get a knowledge because you lack perspective. And perspective is what kind of shapes these things, because my perspective is not all.
You're frozen. Ariana?
I think your internet's cutting that team it out.
Oh, me?
Yeah, we didn't hear the last bit you said.
You're on the roll.
Replay. Basically, experience is what you need, because that perspective brings in experience. It brings in the textbooks, but it also, perspective brings in the intangible, not just from an experience, but because I have empathy, I can feel this. Because I see this, I don't have to feel it. I saw that it was wrong, and I feel like something should be done about that. And I think that is some of the layers we're missing. And the conversation is really not always just is race the problem? No, it is a problem. And yes, there are the people that we have to continue to tell it's a problem. But for other people, it's how do I get you to understand it's a problem? What part of this experience or this knowledge or this empathy or this whatever do I need to get you to feel or experience or immerse in, so that you understand someone else's perspective, that you understand what it's like, because you're never going to fully understand it. But to be able to say, no, that hurts, because I have a deep level of empathy as a person. Mine is just super high. I cry for other people. They ain't even crying, but I felt it. I felt what that would have done to me, and I can experience that. And so for me, very little escapes without hurting. Very little does that. And so I'm much more open to being no, I get why this hurts. I get why this is happening. And so then I can now speak to why they are hurting. Not, I understand everything, but this, I can give you an explanation.
So I'm going to jump in real quick. Ooh, does somebody want to say something? Go ahead, Amina.
I just wanted to add that, the thing about empathy not being able to be taught. And I think that's where the traditional, or not even traditional, but the Western education system fails all of us, is it fails to teach indigenous ways, and it fails to teach things in an indigenous way. And so not everyone's classroom, and you get 2.5 seconds. I'm speaking from a Native American perspective. You get 2.5 seconds of exactly what happened to the Native Americans, throughout history, and that's just not adequate. So, of course, when you're just glazing over something in a textbook, you're not going to feel exactly how the people who were persecuted felt, or even going over slavery, or any culture that's been colonized and mistreated in the United States over the years. You're not going to get the full experience by just looking in a textbook, listening to someone lecture to you for an hour and a half. It's just, so I don't really have a solution to that, other than having a shared experience that puts you through some kind of simulation. And I think a solution could be something like meditation, where you kind of use an outside system that you're not used to, and you go outside of Western ways or whatever. So I'm getting lost because there's trucks and stuff going by. But just taking it outside of yourself and really making the effort within your heart and within yourself to understand through something else that you're not used to. That's what I was trying to get out, but I don't know.
So we're saying decolonize.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So since we said that, I know I'm cutting you off, Devin.
No,
so let's shift just a little bit. So, because I've heard education, there's an underlying theme of decolonization. For you all as a group, what do you all think that can look like? Like, what does decolonization look like in regards to figuring out a way of how to dismantle racism, but as well as share the story of the people who are marginalized in this nation, in this country?
I think it's tough now. I mean, they have like Common Core, which is, the person who came up with Common Core had like a reasoning for it, where it's like, when you're in a business, they ask you for, the Anderson file. They don't ask you for the Anderson file and a history of your childhood and how that made you feel. And like that was the reasoning behind the Common Core standard. And that's what's kind of being taught to kids is, we need to be united in the end goal, opposed to be united with the foundation. So, which that, it's kind of hard when the focal point is let's test well and get some money for a school and get you into college and have that reflect highly on the schools and have that cycle going. It's tough to squeeze in some humanity, and then there's human and humanities, and it's hard to squeeze that in when everything's geared toward STEM or STEAM. And, but I understand the reasoning behind it. We're so focused on staying relevant economically. I think that's been the root of education, is staying relevant economically, whether it be way back when it was racing with the Soviets. They're like, hey, that's when government really started getting involved in education, was like, listen, we need to make sure these kids are learning their science, their math. We need to make sure that we're racing to get to the moon. We need to make sure we're racing and we're ready to compete internationally. So when that's the focal point in an education system, it's really hard to squeeze in some of the humanities, although I believe there needs to be humanities. I'm glad that there's an A in STEAM now, and it's not just STEM. I'm glad I'm glad we have more time for recess, more time for lunch, more social opportunities, so where you can socialize with people and build experiences. And being in the school system or teaching in the school system in Southern California, like the school I'm at is 50% white, 40% Latino. So it's nice to see all the kids kind of just running around, just building rapport and seeing how, everyone's still human and, still bleeds blood and still cries for certain reasons, still gets real pissed off when their cheese stick hits the ground, just anything, just anything. And I think we need more of that in the education system, more of the humanities.
I agree with Amina on, I think indigenous ways need to be taught, and it need to be taught in indigenous ways too. And I mean that in the sense of like across the globe. Like the biggest issue I think with the Western world is when you go to every other place, Asia, Africa, you know, the American continent in general before like colonization, stuff like that, it's not religion, spirituality. And so there's an attachment to the land, but you still rely on science, you know, like they're not separate. Spirituality and science are the same thing. So you still use the stars, you know, you have the sundial and you have other things, you know, they built the pyramids. How do they build the pyramids? You know, like we use rulers and calculators and stuff like that, but then that was all. You have to do that by eye and hand, you know, and they have their own measurement systems and stuff like that, but it all comes from like the same place, and they still believe in like the spirituality and things like you need to take care of the land and take care of the water and take care of the air and all the things. But in the Western world, it becomes, even when you look at like the Western world, it's cultural appropriation. Even their religions, like you base it off of Judaism and other things like that. So you have the Catholic and Christian church trying to claim they're the real things, but you drew a lot of that from nations of color, continents of color. And so when you look around the world, you see spirituality and science go hand in hand. But then you get to the Western world, and now it's, you need a separation. In like the US, you need a separation of church and state, or church and science. So now science cannot be tied to spirituality at all, because a lot of people think religion and spirituality are the same thing. And so you have science is just its own thing that has nothing to do with anything else. You know, it's just numbers and all that. When other people didn't look like the number, even the numbers had spiritual meanings and spiritual ties. You know, it wasn't just 3 is 3 for no reason. You know, it is just what it is. And so I think that is a big thing that needs to, I don't know how you would go about teaching it, but it's something that does need to be taught. And also how Takia said, where our history isn't elective. It's not something that should be taught, or it's not something that's taught in like a core manner, which is interesting because even when the Europeans first came to the American continent, they relied on the spirituality and science of indigenous peoples to even be able to live and thrive, because they couldn't grow anything. So it's like you took all of that knowledge and then separated it and dissected it from its core principle. And now we kind of live in an era where I feel like numbers kind of just rule everything, and there's no humanity in it. You know, it's money. Who can have the most of this? Who has the most assets? Just who can have the most of anything? And even when we have the most of it, we can give to other people. Like if we really gave into our humanity, we could spread the wealth with the entire world. But instead we have a 1% that owns like 80–90% of everything. And to the point where it's not even of just our country. They could take care of our country, or our country, and probably a whole continent if they wanted to, with the amount of money that they hoard, just in this state alone, which is wild. And I think, I don't know, how do you go about solving that in an education standpoint? It's kind of difficult. I really do think it needs, because I know education, I think more teachers are female, but I think there needs to be more teachers of color who are female. Like, I don't think I've ever in my entire life had a Native American teacher. And I don't even think I've ever had an Asian female teacher. Like, I've mostly been taught by white males or white females. And luckily I've had some who are aware of that, and I love that, because they really do try to reach out to kids of color, and they try to understand the perspective, and they try to grow, and they do things that push the envelope and make also the other white kids in their class get that same understanding, which I love that when I came up in Great Mills for some of the teachers I had in high school and even my undergrad. But I do think that is a big hindering, like that's a big obstacle when, because I think in order to combat racism too, women definitely, there needs to be more equality, like in equality and equity amongst women and men, like gender and sex. But at the same time, it can't just be like, I have a bunch of female teachers and they're all white, and none of them know anything about indigenous. They don't know anything about African. They don't know anything about Asian. They don't know anything about any culture. And even like sometimes you have history teachers who again don't they don't even really know the history. Like they know the textbook, but they don't know the history of the people that they're teaching. So like, you know, if me and Mina are in the class and they're talking about, like, you get 3 lines about the things that happen with Native Americans, you know, where they don't even really address the Trail of Tears, or, you know, they bring up slavery, and instead of calling it slavery, it's they had free workers, you know, like they wrote down in the Texas textbook, you know, things like that. That how do you combat racism if you can't even call it for what it is in a textbook, when you don't have to? No individual has to hold that blame. It just is a collective thing, a community thing where all the kids are learning about it, white, black, all of that. If you can't even address it like that, how do you expect the nation to move forward? So
I think that's an interesting point to say. Like, that's why I think my point of you have to raise the issue just to remove it out of the places where it's not actually an issue. Mm-hmm. Because again, like, you have a textbook, there was no reason to actually change those words except you were uncomfortable with it. You were uncomfortable with your past. See, I already have the past. It's in my past. It's in my bloodline. It's already here. You removing it from a textbook doesn't say that it didn't happen. It just teaches a whole nother generation to be ignorant. And then we ignore the issue of race. And so, like, it becomes a whole other thing later on. And I think bringing humanization back into education starts when education can't just be at the schools, because apparently our government cannot be trusted to teach us everything, but they were never meant to teach us everything anyway, right? They weren't, because humanity starts at home. It starts with who was around you to raise you, who was there. And so, yes, a lot of people are disadvantaged by who they were and were not raised by. Mm-hmm. But then you go into schools underfunded, underprepared for anything, and teachers don't care. They don't have what they need, or, like Devin said, they don't actually know the history. They just know what the textbook says. And so now you have kids who may feel disvalued at home, feel disvalued in their text because they're not in it. Mm-hmm. And humanity, you know, a lot of people are pro spirituality, no spirituality, blah, because we all have our view on it. But, you know, going to somewhere that can really teach you something about spirituality, where it infuses numbers, where it infuses a lot of this stuff, it never should have been separated, right? Because a house divided cannot stand, and that was what it was. It was strong. And when they divided it, we've just constantly been falling. And like you said, numbers rule. And so it rules in every way. It rules across the continent, because now we don't need to see humanity. We see numbers. Mm-hmm. And that's why I believe tragedies to a lot of people don't hit unless it's a mass.
Yeah.
We don't care about Black bodies in the street because it's one here in Maryland, one in California, one here. But when someone bombs a school or they shoot up a school, oh, we all care, because 7, 10, 12, 20, hundreds die. And now we care because we see the numbers. And so then you have people who come together like Black Lives Matter, and they list all these names because we need you to see in mass. There's more than just one. We're not like crying and complaining because one person was shot, but the problem is that you don't see the humanity in one. You don't see the humanity in the fact that I'm a person, and if I die today, you may not care, but my family cares. If you died tomorrow and, you know, yeah, you're no longer here, but somebody cares about that. And just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean humanity is not affected. Something's been taken. Life has been taken, and we disvalue life. That's what we proved when they came and when they knocked everything out. They disvalued life. They valued prosperity, which they didn't see in life. But life wasn't. Life brought it, and they didn't see that.
So, Devin, were you going to say something?
No, you go.
Okay. So in proposing a solution that seems easiest to successfully implement, everyone so far that's spoken said the word humanity. And I believe, just like Devin said, infusing more teachers of color, men and women, would instill empathy to younger students. So I feel like a lot of students are having trouble empathizing with people that don't look like them because they don't have role models and figures of authority in their life that differ from them. Devin and I both took Lawyers as Leaders last semester, and in an article that we read, it stated that our generation is extremely low in the ability to empathize with others. And when dealing with other people's humanity, you need to be able to empathize because everyone's not like you. Another thing that I would suggest is specialization in the topics that teachers taught students. Because teachers are, moved as the school sees fit or needs teachers to go. That's where we're not really connecting with the information or given as much information as we should be given, because they can only cover a small aspect. One, because they may not really care about the subjects that they're teaching, but two, they may have not been taught themselves. So if we have people that are truly passionate about what they teach and informed, that's the biggest thing, informed, then we can teach our students to empathize with others, but also give them information that they're being passed by, because we're not asking our teachers to be passionate about what they teach or fully informed on what they teach.
Quick one before, oh, Jordan, were you going to speak?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Go ahead.
In regards to teaching with passion, like I initially set out to teach general education, and I got a lot of experience in the classroom, and at least in Southern California. It's tough because there's not as much impact as you can have as a teacher. It's 90% reading from a script, 10% on the whim, because they're hearing in one ear the principal who needs them to be 2 chapters ahead, and the another ear they're hearing how they have standardized tests that they need to be prepared for. Meanwhile, I was working with like 6 kids who are English second language, and they're just, it was a struggle because the whole class was behind, and then the kids I was working with were just far behind. And I mean, it's just tough when certain standards are written. Like I'm hanging out with Lil Jose, who's from Mexico, and he's supposed to read a question about how Bernice went to a fundraiser and got found 11 Chardonnay glasses. I mean, it's just something he could not relate to whatsoever. And this is the standard that he's supposed to attest to. He's supposed to understand, and he has the math skills, but if he can't read this like other fine-tuned language, that's not even colloquial English. It's like academic English for a 4th grader who's not, his English or language is not English, first language is not English. Then it's just such a disadvantage, and the teacher can't really do anything about it. And even me, who's one-on-one with the children, I can only do so much because it's so demanding for everyone in the classroom, for the teachers and for the students. And it's just not tying it back in with the humanities. It's not a good environment to be teaching humanities. It's just not enough time to give it what it needs, and it needs a lot more.
And there's one thing I wanted to add too, because I think one big solution I do think is important, because it made me think of like a rap lyric. Like Vince Staples said, what is it? My teacher told me we were slaves. My mama told me we were kings. And I think that's a big thing too, where like even recently, there's so many large portions of history that are vital that are really left out. Like recently when you told me, I didn't know the mass of Native Americans that were enslaved with African Americans, which that was wild. So when I learned, I like found this page and it was like they gave a lot of information. I just started like reading it all, and I didn't know how expansive it was and things like that. And that also Native Americans were being shipped around the globe just like Africans were being shipped around the globe. I didn't know that. I thought it was more like it happened in the continent of America, you know, but then also because Native Americans are on their own land and they're going to fight to the death, eventually turns into like genocide, and then you just start bringing Africans over. But that wasn't the case. And then beyond that, I feel like even when we learn our history, when you go in school, you'll learn about Egypt, but they don't tell you that, like, you know, they'll say Africa and they'll say Egypt, but they won't say that the Egyptians were African, you know, or like they, you know, they don't attach that to you, or like even when you're indigenous, they don't attach, like, you don't learn about Olmec, you don't really learn about Inca, you don't really learn about Aztec, you don't really learn about any of that unless you choose like an elective or you go to grad school. By that point, you know, like you're 18 and you don't know something about the core part of the foundation that led to this country. And I think that's something that would be a big solution. Like if you could somehow work that into the curriculum and, you know, and not make it so demanding, like Jordan's saying, where you don't even have the flexibility to, you know, actually, I know a lot more about this. I did some research. Let me add some stuff into this. It has to be on like, I have to do this and this. And if I don't do it by Friday, then I have to skip these two chapters. These two chapters just happen to be about slavery and Trail of Tears, or any, you know, it's you, because I've been in classes literally where they'll skip chapters and chapters will have core details about history. But, you know, because you're on a timeline, you can't, like, they can, at least, like, they can't. Like, even if they really wanted to, I have to move you forward, because at the end of it, if I don't move you forward and we get to the standardized test and you haven't learned anything else, then it's like I failed you in another manner because you're not going to pass. And so it's very complex when it comes to that. I think that's an interesting thing. So
I believe it's what is seen as vital. But I think Allie wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, this was getting good. So we have about 5 more minutes. And so option, either we can continue on where you all are, or I had wanted to kind of, even though it's only 5 minutes, I would love to hear what you all think about the role of our government. Yes, go ahead.
I didn't get a chance to chime in on the other part, but
louder. So, I mean, we can't hear you.
I said I just wanted to chime in on the other part. So I wrote down some notes from what you guys were saying, and it lines up with some of the things that I had in mind as well. And one of you guys was mentioning that it's kind of beyond the education system, and so like how do we institute these solutions and also reach these kids' parents too? Because I'm thinking, when I think of education, I think it definitely starts with children, and you know, it goes even before we even get to college and like start going into grad school and things like that, and you know, dissecting the disparities that they have in education on those levels. I think there's a lot of disparities that need to be attacked on, you know, in our elementary schools and in our middle schools and high schools as well. And so I had an idea of maybe I'm not sure what kind of cultural sensitivity training teachers have, but I think that needs to be indigenized. I also think that I also, you know, at least like have like multiple perspectives from different people of different backgrounds, and not just have it, you know, a bunch of white old men, you know, telling you how to teach your students. And majority of those students are students of color who aren't going to get it. So, and then along with that is, you know, empowering indigenous Black youth and, you know, letting them lead. So like, instead of, you know, I remember in elementary school, we had to stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. So, you know, for my people, that wasn't good. I mean, to the American population, oh, this is awesome. Like, you know, respect the flag, respect this, respect that. You know, that flag was the demise of my people. So I don't feel the same way. I don't feel the same way about that. You know, as a child, I didn't understand that, but now I look back and I'm like, wow, like, I'm not going to compare it to the boarding school situation, but, you know, it kind of feels like Native kids every day are going to a version of the boarding schools. You know, the culture stripped. We're not allowed to practice art. We're not allowed to be ourselves. You know, you got people like cutting kids' hair and stuff in these places.
Yes.
You know, and it's not cool. That's not cool. So, you know, empower your indigenous bodies in the class. Like, if you have a Native American person in your class, you should get to know that student. Ask them how to better make the classroom more comfortable for them. Ask them some of the things that they do in ceremony. You know, like just even letting a child like smudge the classroom or something before, you know, once a week or something. Doing little things like that to empower the kids in there and making them feel like it's okay for them to be themselves. That's a big step. So, and so everyone's kind of had like a resounding theme about empathy. With empathy, I think it definitely starts within yourself. So like you have to be the best version of yourself before you can affect anybody else. So like, and after you affect you, you go on to affect other people who are like you, because there's definitely some institutionalized oppression within our own groups. So, you know, Black people, we fight each other all the time. Native people fight each other all the time. There's Native people that voted for Trump. There's Black people that voted for Trump. So, you know, you have all these divides within our own populations that we need to take care of before we can even reach people on like a greater scale. So I think it needs to be in a stepwise process where we attack the issues that we have within ourselves, and then we attack the issues we have within our cultural groups, and then we move on to attack people who are outside of our cultural groups. Not necessarily attack, but, you know, just make people more aware of things that you have going on internally, that your people have going on internally. But before we can attack that, of course, we have to be on the same page. So, and I think a lot of people of color aren't on the same page. So that needs to be fixed first. But, and I think a lot of these things that I'm saying would also reduce the feeling of just being another statistic. Because that's kind of, for me, and I know other people of color, it's kind of, we kind of have like self-fulfilling prophecies when you constantly hear like, you're more likely to be raped or sexually assaulted as a Native American woman. You're more likely to be shot on the street for wearing a hoodie and eating Skittles than anybody else, or somebody that's not of color, somebody that's not a Black male. You know, so it's just like little things like that, and, you know, I guess perpetuating the more positive stereotypes about our people, or not even stereotypes, but just more positive traits about us that make us who we are, and not always just constantly focusing on the negative. Because like as a child, I mean, of course you have to have that guard, but at the same time you want to have a positive impact on their self-esteem by letting them know that they are kings or queens, you know. So that's all I have to say about
that. Agreed.
Well, ladies and gents, I'm going to go ahead and close this off because we've almost officially been on here for an hour. Thank you very much for giving me your time. Is there anything that any of you all would like to say? I had wanted to pick y'all's brains a little bit about what was happening, of course, in regards to the border, as well as, of course, the hair cutting, because we've had some really major racial issues that have been occurring in the African and Indigenous and the Latino community, as well as the Jewish community in regards to, of course, the hate crimes that are still going on, because that spiked immensely in this nation. And so I had kind of wanted to have that conversation with you all, but I know our time is winding down, so I'm going to ask you all live if sometime, no time soon, but maybe next week or within the next couple of weeks, if we could definitely come back again and address at least those three issues, because I think those are some core things that, core discussions that are being held, but millennials' voices are not being addressed. You're not being asked what you think, what you feel, what you think, what you see, what you,
no.
Your voices aren't even being utilized at this point in time. And I think that since you all are going to be the ones very soon here picking up the mantle, actually you have a hold of the mantle. You guys have just got to decide what you're going to do with it. I would love to be able to use all your voices in regards to addressing these issues that are occurring in all of our communities right now, because, you know, what happens and what we don't know impacts us all. And so is there anything you all would like to say before we leave?
Definitely open for this other conversation. Love it. This has been, you know, great, enlightening as well, and fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh.
And I do have another thing I have to get to, so I'm gonna fuck out.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Anybody? Okay, bye, you guys. Thank you all for coming. This is Allie, and we will see you guys later. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.